Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here, day number 5, the final day of Worlds 2024 play-ins. I am excited to get into it. By the end of this video, we are going to know the final 2 teams to qualify, of course, alongside Mad Lions and alongside GAM, who qualified yesterday on day number 4. If you want to know my thoughts on how any of that has gone down, anything at Worlds has gone down so far, the entire play-in stage, you know, my power rankings for the main stage as well, check out the playlist up in the iCard that's going to have every single Worlds video that we have done during this cycle already. But of course, today we are going to be finishing off play-ins. This was a very exciting day of action. It was already set up to be a very interesting day of action just because of the matchups. The 2 teams that are going through, no matter who they are going to be interesting. And unfortunately, the 2 teams that go out here today are also going to be interesting. It's just a perfect storm in terms of matchups, in terms of situations, and I am excited to cover it. I hope you guys are as well. And without further ado, let's get right into it. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go game by game in both of the series. We'll talk about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game that we cover. And of course, at the end of each series, we will be giving a player of the series to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will be talking about the Swiss stage draw, which did happen after the conclusion of the second series here today, but that's going to be saved for the end of the video. All of that analysis is going to be happening at the end. Most of today will be spent talking about the end of play-ins, the final 2 series that we got. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The first series that we are going to talk about is probably the most interesting one for me. Not that both aren't incredibly interesting. I think we got ideal matchups, as I said in the intro, but this one is really a banger because one of these teams is guaranteed to make it out of the play-ins and go to the main stage. It's a matchup between the number 1 seed from the LLA in Movistar Rainbow 7 and the number 1 seed from the CB LOL in Pain Gaming. The fact that one of these teams has to win this series and move on to the Swiss stage is amazing. I'm so excited that both of these teams have this opportunity because this is likely the last hurrah for both of them in terms of their current structures. Like the CB LOL or Brazil, you know, America's South, as I guess it will be called next year, they will still have a seed at Worlds. They will still have an opportunity to represent themselves, but this could be the last ever hurrah for the LLA, for a Latin American team, and for them to go the deepest they've ever gone. They've never won a series here at Worlds before. For them not only to have won a series already, but for them to have beaten a North American team in a best of 3 and now be 1 series away from being able to qualify for the main stage is incredible. And who's to say they're not favorites? In fact, when you look at my pre-tournament power rankings, R7 came in above Pain. Pain was last in my power rankings, and obviously I did not get that right. You know, the SoftBank Hawks were just barely above them, but they were clearly worse. We had teams like Viking that just never really clicked at this tournament, but R7 was already above Pain going into this tournament for me. So is it really all that outlandish to consider them favorites in this series? They have a lot of good things going for them, most notably the solo laners, who have been exceptional at this tournament. Kaney, I think, has kind of been the star for them in the mid lane in terms of what he has been able to create over the course of this tournament, but of course, you have to point out Summit in the top lane as the priority player. This is a Korean top lane matchup, and I'm excited to see if Summit's going to be able to get those leads. He really did struggle in the previous series against GAM. It didn't really feel like he was able to get the same kind of advantages against a player like Kiaya, that's obviously also very individually talented like he is, and so if he can have a much more winnable matchup against Weiser, that's going to be absolutely ginormous for R7's ability to move on. They really play well when Summit is playing from ahead, but again, the solo lanes have been kind of the priority. I think Odie has actually been really good in the jungle. I think for the most part, he's actually done a really good job of controlling tempo. In the early game, sometimes he can just get a bit outskilled, but you know, that's kind of what you expect from a team like this. The macro is just not going to be perfect. They're going to make mistakes, but they have enough talent to be able to get through, and Seo and Leon's are fine. Like, they are a good bot lane. They're not exceptional, but they are good enough for you to be able to win with, especially if the solo laners are clicking. And so R7 definitely has a clear identity, and they've shown that even if they're down going into some mid to late games, they're not a team that just folds over and dies. Go look at that series against 100 Thieves. Yes, obviously it's miraculous that they were able to win it, but all of those games went late. All of them were pseudo comebacks for Rainbow 7, where they really had to dig in their heels and win fights from neutral. And so to be able to prove that they can do that, whether or not you think 100 Thieves is a good opposition or not, it's really good to see that R7 has that in their toolbox. But for Pain, on the other side, the reason I have them as favorites coming into this series, as I stated at the end of yesterday's video, is because I just think that they are so dynamic and so difficult to deal with because of how balanced they are across the board. Yes, you do have star players like Titan that are definitely showing up at this tournament, but one of the things I actually was critical of Pain for domestically is it didn't really feel like they had a star player. It didn't really feel like they had somebody that was going to step up and be just way better than all of the other players in their position at Worlds during the play-ins here. But even though that has been the case, that actually went from a problem to a huge asset for them, because it's not just, oh, they don't really have a star. It's, oh, everybody here can be the star at any given moment. They don't have one style or one player that they can play through. R7, you know, if they have to play through Seo, if they have to play through Odie, they can, but they so much rather play through Kaney. They so much rather would play through Summit. Pain doesn't have that problem. They can genuinely play through anybody on this team. Anybody can carry at any given moment, and that has shown itself to be a gigantic problem for other teams at this tournament. So we'll see if that ends up continuing to be an issue for teams to be able to figure out. That's kind of what I'm anticipating. Of course, if you can get someone like Titan very far ahead, I think that could be a really good matchup for Pain. That's personally where I'm looking, like player matchup as something that could be taken advantage of by Pain. I think they have the better AD carry in this series, even if I think their solo laners might be a little bit more questionable. But for me, the biggest matchup is clearly going to be in the jungle, Odie versus Karriok. I do think that this is kind of going to determine just where the series goes tempo-wise. Karriok has really not impressed me so far throughout this tournament. He's kind of been okay, and I was really not a big fan of his tape, but if he can be better than Odie, if he can set up his laners more consistently than Odie can on the other side, that's going to completely change the complexity of all of these games. And so that's going to be something I'm watching out for. But again, every matchup is important. Dinkato is important. Weiser is important on the top side. Curry is important in the support position. He's had a very good tournament so far, in my opinion. There's just a lot to go over here for Pain versus R7, but we could talk in circles about the preview. It's time to get into the actual game analysis, and of course, that's going to start with game number 1. So let's get right into it. The winner of game number 1 was Rainbow 7. They are going to take game number 1. They're going to go up 1-0 in this series. And they did it off the back of their star mid laner, the player who has been stepping up over and over again at this tournament, Kaney, who has been exceptionally good in the mid lane. He has some pretty big shoes to fill. We've talked a lot about Korean mid laners in the LLA performing incredibly well. Mireyu was obviously, you know, kind of known for that. He was a player that I was hyping up a lot on this channel over the course of many years, but Kaney, who's been playing in Brazil for a long time, steps in here and has actually just been terrific for Rainbow 7 at this tournament. I had this team rated pretty highly, even with Kaney just being an okay mid laner. With him really stepping up and playing the way that he is, this is looking like a Swiss team, and that's why they get this pretty clean game number 1 win. This was relatively dominant, like not particularly close. They were definitely the better team in this game playing around the Syndra. Now, I definitely want to say, like, I've been really low on Syndra. In fact, it's been kind of a channel staple over the past couple of days that I just don't think Syndra is nearly as strong as a lot of other analysts or other people seem to think she is right now, especially in pro. I think she's very good for solo queue, but I think she's a lot more punishable in pro than people give her credit for. I think she's great as a blind pick, which is what she was in this game. You know, if you just need something safe in the mid lane, Syndra can do that. I just think that there are other champions that do a little bit more. Things like Orianna were banned out in this game. Akali was banned out in this game. Even LeBlanc was banned out in this game. All of that stuff I think should be higher priority, but it was banned out. But there are other options that I also think could do well. That being said, I'm not going to just throw away the fact that Syndra has been getting a little bit better as team quality has improved. Maybe that moves in that direction going into the main stage as well. I thought it would go backwards. I thought Syndra would just continue to lose priority because she was not performing well at this tournament. But again, if good players are going to pick her up, likely she's going to look a lot better. And this was a very good Syndra game. I'm certainly not going to try to deny that. Kaney got rolling very early on in the game. And honestly, he played so many of these fights so well. There was one fight where he got hit by a charm by Dinkato. And if he got blown up there, then it's over. Like, they actually start to lose a lot of their pressure and they end up losing like a lot more than probably just that fight. But he actually just barely survives, and that completely changes the complexity of the fight. Those are the very fine margins that games like this are played on, but Kaney was excellent. Positioning, damage, all of it. Really, really good, and he has been exceptionally good at this tournament. The other player that was awesome in this game was Leon's in the support position on the Rakan. What a Rakan game from him. I think he's not going to get nearly enough credit for just how good he was here. R5 Rakan, especially after you've already shown that you want to pick the Xayah, can be a bit counterable. Like, there are definitely a lot of things that I think can punish it, and Lucian Nami theoretically should be one of those things. They should have enough tempo and pressure to be able to punish it, but early game ends up being a bit of a disaster for the Lucian, if only because of just the intervention from R7 and from Odie and, even Kaney, at times moving down into the bot lane. They put a lot of pressure into making sure Xayah could survive, and then Rakan in the mid to late game just completely blew the entire game up. Leon's was obviously great at being able to pick off the Lucian in a lot of these clutch situations, and so I just want to give a lot of credit to him. I don't think his name has been said enough at this tournament by a lot of analysts, and I wanted to bring him up as a player who I do think has been playing well and who had a really great game. Odie was always in the right place at the right time. I think his macro is getting better as this tournament goes along. I think he's getting more comfortable. This is a player who has been obviously to the international stage quite a few times, but he's never found the level of success he's finding right now. I think he's still getting used to it, but at least it looked good here. And then, Summit, Sayo, they were solid. Summit was definitely the better top laner. We'll get to that. Shout out Weiser, AFK Rage, split pushing throughout the back half of this game, but it is what it is. Like, Kaney was the star, okay? Kaney and Leon's, in my opinion, clearly the star players here for R7 in game one, and now they're one game away from the Swiss stage, and Pain, unfortunately, is one game away from having their tournament ended here. This was a really not good game number one. Of course, they had the game plan that I wanted them to have going into this, getting Titan and Curry in a good position early and trying to play through the bottom side of the map, but the Lucian Nami just couldn't actually stay relevant. The moment that Rainbow 7 put any sort of resources into that lane, the big lead that they were able to generate on their own, it was just completely gone in an instant. There was no way to really be able to recover it. I think, obviously, I'm not blaming them entirely for it. Titan absolutely could have played better in the back half of this game, but it's not entirely their fault. Dud of the game for me is going to go to Dinkedo in the mid lane. This is something we're going to talk about more throughout this series, but Kaney completely mega gapped Dinkedo in the mid lane. Like, this 1v1 was just not even remotely close. Syndra Ahri is not something that should be this bad for the Ahri. It's not exactly like a premier perfect matchup that is unwinnable for Syndra or anything like that, but you should not be down 30 CS at any point in this game, actually just losing 1v1. It's just horrible. Kaney is completely outclassing Dinkedo in terms of the 1v1. That's going to have to get better throughout the rest of the series. Kariel did not do anything in the jungle. The Maokai couldn't really actually salvage this game. Again, a couple of these team fights, maybe one more, Maokai Q or a couple bits more damage, actually, take out the Syndra or take out the Rakan and, make these things a lot more interesting, but it just wasn't there. And then Weiser, like I said, just noticing that his team is getting absolutely rolled, sees that he's in actually a pretty good matchup, and just says screw it and split pushes the rest of the game. Rage pushes, and it is what it is, right? I can't really comment in terms of gameplay. It's not the right move, but I'm sure he was mega tilted, and it's not like he would have salvaged the game or anything like that. For Pain, though, they are now one game away from being eliminated at Worlds already after game number one. That's how important it is in a best of three like this. They have to bounce back in game number two, but Rainbow 7 is an inch away, one game away from being the first ever Latin American team to make it to the main stage of the World Championships. Can they do it here in game number two, or is Pain going to send us to a do or die game number three? Well, the winner of game number two was Pain Gaming. They are going to take game number two. They're going to even up the series here at 1 apiece, and we are going to a do or die game number three. It is winner take all. The winner moves on to the Swiss stage. The loser has their tournament dreams ended. It is everything on the line for these two individual organizations and for these two individual regions in the last version of their current form. It is about as poetic as you could write it, but we got to talk about game number two before we get into game number three. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Pain played excellently here in game number two. This was an important bounce back and honestly a huge confidence booster. They say, screw it, we actually still had the right idea. We just had some bad execution in game number one. We pinpointed that was our problem, and we're going to go back to basically the same draft. We're going to go Ahri mid, we're going to go Jax top, we're going to go Lucian Nami. We're just going to draft the Sejuani to be able to facilitate a tad bit more consistently than the Maokai in the early game, and all of a sudden it's just an execution diff. All they need to do is look at this matchup, say we know what we're supposed to do, and execute it better, and that's exactly what they did. They didn't let the Lucian Nami get completely destroyed by errant roams in this game early on. They allowed them to generate a gigantic lead 2v2, which they did. They got a gigantic lead 2v2, and that opened up the Jax to be able to take over in the late game. The Sejuani was so much more useful than something like the Maokai was later on because it just had more utility. And now we're looking at a Pain Gaming that has options, and a Pain Gaming with options is very difficult to end up dealing with. So credit to them. Titan is a very easy choice for player of the game. I also want to point this out. I'm not sure if anybody has said this, but golly, like when the EU casters say Titan, I guarantee in my brain they're saying Cheaton. I don't know how many of y'all hear that as well, but oh my god, it is like regular for me. Anyways, Titan is really good. I don't think you need me to tell you that. I think even I underrated him coming into this tournament in terms of just how good his raw mechanics are. You know, I was pretty high on him mechanically. I just didn't think that he was set up to be a superstar in terms of the context of this team, in terms of how much they played through him in the bot lane, because they played through him about as much as they played through Dinkato or about as much as they played through Weiser. I didn't think he was going to have this like resource heavy takeover type of performance, but yeah, put him on something like Lucian and he can obliterate you, and he didn't even get a lot of resources in this game. He just destroyed Sayo. It was a gigantic ADC gap in this game, and that's a credit to Titan. Obviously a player who has experience at this level, who has played here many, or I guess a couple of times, and has looked better every single time. I think this is the best that Titan has ever looked individually as a player, and Pain has got to feel very lucky to have him. Curry was obviously a big part of that as well, but I would be remiss to not say that Titan was by far the most important player in this game for Pain. That was very, very obvious to me. And then of course, Weiser on the top side. Summit was miserable in this game, kept, making a lot of mistakes in terms of utilizing his movement skills to be a little too far forward, just generally AFK pushing side lanes and not really respecting the enemy team. You know, the regular Summit things, the things we've become very accustomed to when it comes to his play. But Weiser was really good at punishing that. And I want to make it very clear, I don't know what kind of drugs Summit is on. I don't really know whether or not he read the patch notes or not, but picking Cassante into Jax like twice in a row, like not good, man. Really not good. In fact, Jax was buffed on this patch to specifically be a better Cassante counter pick, and so the B1 Jax just ends up being a gigantic problem because R7 opts themselves into a bad matchup, and Summit can't really course correct it, and then he individually also plays bad. So credit to Weiser for taking advantage of it. This guy absolutely took over the later half of this game, and I have been crazy impressed with him at this tournament. He is another one of the players that I've just been blown away by in terms of his individual mechanical performances. This guy's actually very, very good, so really happy for that. Karioke, Dinkato, they were fine. Dinkato continues to struggle a bit 1v1 in lane, this time a bit more understandable into the Hui. The long range just makes it a bit more difficult for the Ahri to be as active on the map, and this is clearly just a comfort pick for him, but something that we're going to have to continue to monitor. And then, of course, everybody else on the team came together well in the mid game to be able to take a lead and extend it into a gigantic one. Overall, I just think Pain looked excellent here in game number 2, and they're going to have to do it one more time before Rainbow 7 on the other side. Definitely not game number 1, where it just felt like everything was going right for you. It felt like everywhere around the map you were just winning regardless of the situation. Like your bot lane was down so much gold, and yet you had the resources and the teammates to be able to turn that around and put it into a good position. You had Kaney completely popping off. Summit had a pretty good game. Overall, R7 just had a lot of things going right for them in game 1, and none of those things ended up going right, even with a very similar draft in game number 2. Sayo got exposed. He's going to get dud of the game for me. Just not a good performance on the Xayah. I think this opens up some more questions about whether or not this actually is a good answer to Lucian. I think generally Xayah Rakan is very safe, very low cap. Like it's not something that's ever going to be able to actually take over games. I understand the idea of maybe wanting to go for it, but I don't think it's nearly as consistent as something like Jhin. If you just wanted to neutralize the laning phase, I think it gives you more range. Even something like Ezreal, I think makes a lot more sense here if you just want to play safe, but we'll see if that's an adaptation they want to make, because Sayo has just not been nearly as good as Titan in terms of the 2v2 down in the bot lane. I think Kaney also had a relatively rough later half of the game. You just didn't really have enough setup for the Hui to work. I love Hui in the meta right now. There are a lot of mid laners that I think are over prioritized, like LeBlanc and Syndra. I do not. I think Hui's like very under prioritized in terms of how good he is as a champion. If you have any sort of like active engage setup, like a Rel, or literally any engaged jungler like a Wukong, Hui can be very difficult to deal with because of the range. He's just by far the longest relevant range champion in the game right now, and that makes him very difficult to actually punish in any sort of meaningful way. But Kaney couldn't actually do anything. There is no hard engage on this team outside of Rakan, who just doesn't really get that done in the same way. You need something like a Rel, in my opinion, in order to make Hui work, and they didn't have that, and so the champion just didn't end up functioning. I already talked a bit about how Summit just wasn't very good in this game. I think Odie also was just kind of running it for a lot of this game on the Poppy, just really bad macro movements in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was praising him for that in the previous game. I got to point out, sometimes he's just a little bit slow to these rotations, and I think, again, a lot of the nerves are probably catching up with him, or at least that's how it looks on camera. So R7's got to turn it around. They are still one game away. Like, none of the stuff that I said at the end of game number 1 is gone after this loss. You just have to get it done in a do-or-die game number 3, but this is it. It's winner take all. The winner of this game will be moving on to the Swiss stage. The loser will be going home. Who's going to be able to take the South American clash? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Pain Gaming. They are going to take game number 3 just barely. They're going to take this series 2-1 just barely, and they will be moving on to the Swiss stage for the first time in what, 5-6 years for the CB LOL. This is an incredible accomplishment for Pain, a team that I gave no chance of being able to do this, of being able to accomplish, being able to get through the play-ins, to be able to get to the Swiss stage. I didn't think this was going to happen. I didn't think this was the team. I didn't think these were the players, and I was entirely wrong about that. And R7, unfortunately, they were also a bit wrong because, oh my god, like, I can't tell you the emotional whiplash that I went through watching this game. I'm sure a lot of you who watched this went through the same thing. It's just the most heartbreaking possible defeat that could ever happen. Your region has literally never been to the main stage of a World Championships under any banner, and you are one game away from doing it. You have a gigantic lead, not once, but twice at 2 different points in this game, and both times you almost immediately throw it away with some macro indecisions, and now in what is likely your region's last chance to have like a real shot of being able to do anything at a tournament like this, you just throw it away. It's like, I can't imagine how heartbreaking this is, but you know, I want to be congratulatory to Pain. I was sad enough over on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter if you don't already. I live tweet a lot of the stuff that's going on in these games, but you got to give a lot of credit to Pain. I'm certainly not trying to take anything away from them. This was not a clean game by any means. I'm not trying to sit here and say that Pain played amazing and R7 played horrible and R7 should have won anyways. No, like, both of these teams made a myriad of mistakes over the course of this game. There were a lot of problems in the early game specifically for Pain. They were winning in kills. They actually had a ton of pressure through the map, and yet they could not generate any gold. They were losing 1v1 in every lane. Kaney had a mammoth lead in the middle of the map. I genuinely think it was up like 60 or 70 CS at like 12 minutes, something like that. It is completely indescribable for Ari to be down that far in the mid lane, but they rally, they're able to keep their heads about them. They see R7 run into the middle of an unwarded jungle multiple times, and they're just able to capitalize on those advantages. They're able to get some barons, and eventually they're able to win one final fight to end the game. It was scrappy. It was everything you wanted to see out of 2 minor region teams going head to head in a brutal scenario like this, and you just got to be excited for the CB LOL and for Pain. Player of the game for me is going to go to Corey in the support position. There's just no other player that I could give this to. Almost every single major pick in this game was off the back of the Rel, being able to catch somebody out, whether it was the Nautilus, whether it was the Sejuani, just walking up with no vision. Hell, there were times where those ultimates landing on the Varus were incredibly consequential towards being able to take over the back half of these games. Corey was just the main player, like, for sure, throughout a majority of this game. Perhaps you can look to things like the Ari being able to find some charm picks in the later half of the game, but Dinkato was miserable in lane and got completely gapped by Kaney in terms of the 1v1, so there's no way I could consider him for that. And then there's also my player of the series as a whole, which is going to go to Titan in the AD carry role. There was just nobody else who deserved this. He messed up in a couple of these fights. There was one fight specifically, I believe it was I guess 6th dragon of the game, the 3rd dragon for R7 to be able to tie it up. This is pre-Soul. It could have been the Soul fight. I honestly, it's hard to remember with this game, but it was Callista just completely chasing the LeBlanc out of the fight, and like, that's great on paper, but now LeBlanc already did all of her damage. She went in and did all of the burst, and now the Callista is just out of the fight, and Pain almost single-handedly lost the game off of that really bad decision from Titan. I was about to completely lambast him on social media and on this channel, being like, he single-handedly lost the game for Pain, but fortunately for him, that fight didn't actually end up ending the game, which was pretty good because he was very good elsewhere throughout this game. It was just one minor mistake, but he was so good in game 2. He was so influential here for most of game 3. There's really nobody else who deserves player of the series more than Titan, and you can see that on his face. He is the heart and soul, not only of this team, but right now of this entire region, and I can't think of a better representative for the CBLOL right now than Titan. He is exemplifying them, I think, at the highest level, but Weiser is also somebody that, I mean, this guy's the GOAT. Like, did you watch some of these final fights? He was literally diving in 1v4 and being completely unkillable on this K'Sante. This is how you pilot K'Sante. This is the matchup you want something like K'Sante into, the Renekton much more than the Jax, but I've been so impressed with Weiser. To me, the players that have stood out the most at this tournament for Pain, Weiser, obviously Titan, and Kuri. Like, they have been the 3 stars. Karyuk and Dinkedo, like, they're fine. Like, they're okay. Like, Karyuk actually had a couple of really good engages on the Wukong, but at times was a little bit slow in terms of rotations, was able to get that final smite on the Dragon Soul, which was very consequential, because 4 Infernal Dragon Elder Soul for Rainbow 7 probably would have been the end of the game on the spot. And then, of course, Dinkedo got obliterated in laning phase, but was very useful down the stretch with the Ahri. There are pluses and minuses for Pain, but they're going through. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Titan looks like a mega star. His support looks very good. And Weiser in the top lane is also playing well. That's going to be enough to make teams nervous in the actual main stage. Depending on their matchup, this could be a very, very fun couple of days for Pain. But for Rainbow 7 on the other side, just heartbreaking. Like, genuinely, I cannot express how defeated I would feel if I was Rainbow 7 in this instance. My condolences go out to them. You can see it on their faces after this. Like, for it to be like such a sad end, right? Like such an anticlimactic, unpoetic end for the LLA, where in their final attempt, they have the best team they've ever had representing them at the world stage. They get the closest they've ever gotten to be able to get into the main stage, and they have it within the palm of their hands, and they randomly walk into an unwarded jungle twice and just die for no reason to throw the game away. I just can't imagine the mental toll that takes on them. There are positives. I think Summit and Kaney were just excellent. Kaney in particular throughout this tournament was so dominant. The LeBlanc game was genuinely unreal. He is a superstar, and I hope to see him somewhere next year, because this level of performance on this level of stage should not go unnoticed by anyone. He needs to be in a major region, period. End of story. But unfortunately, I have to give a dud of the game, and it does kind of have to go to Odie. I think you could give this to Leon's. Both of them were just not good enough. Like, they made too many critical errors. They ran it down, quite frankly, and didn't really allow the rest of their team to be able to take over. But Odie, I think, was the worst of the two in terms of culprits. He just had a really bad game. And like I was saying at the beginning of this video, like, nerves have been very clear for him in particular. You can see it on his face. He's not great at really hiding that emotion. Every time they pan to him on the camera, it feels like he's like screaming and sweating, and you can just see how much it means to him. And this is a player that literally everyone on the team was talking like, we want to do it for Odie. We want to do it for this legend of the LLA in their final year of existence as kind of one singular region. They wanted to be able to get Odie into that main stage, and unfortunately it was Odie who just wasn't quite there, and it's going to be a hard pill to swallow, but I couldn't really talk about anybody else in terms of dud of the game. I think Sayo was slightly better here on the Varus, but the damage was a little low for me. Summit was excellent in the back half here. He just eventually fell off on the Renekton because that champion eventually falls off, and like I said, Kaney was phenomenal, but R7 should not hang their heads in shame. I would love to sit here and say, oh, this is a fantastic, result, and they can build on this moving into next year, because generally that's what I would say in a situation like this, but there is no next year for at least this iteration of the LLA. Obviously, Rainbow 7 is likely to still exist. Hopefully, we can still see a lot of these players in either the Americas North or the Americas South, but at the end of the day, like, this was their shot to be able to represent the LLA, and it just didn't quite swing their way. But congratulations to Pain Gaming. What an unbelievable final game. This is genuinely going to go down as one of my favorite games of all time, or at least one of the ones that I screamed the loudest at, and I wouldn't have had it any other way between these two teams. But moving on now to our second series of the day, and this one was definitely much more interesting for a lot of people. These are two of the better teams in the play-in stage, and honestly, it's very surprising that one of these teams won't make it. Kind of the inverse of what we just talked about with this previous series. It's, of course, a matchup between the number 1 seed from the PCS in PSG Talon and the number 3 seed from the LCS in 100 Thieves. The fact that one of these teams won't make it out is entirely 100 Thieves' fault, and I guess kind of PSG Talon's fault, but the fact that they are in this situation at all is genuinely incredible. 100 Thieves, of course, losing in round number 1 to Rainbow 7, who we just saw put up a really good fight. That loss is looking better and better as this tournament goes along with how well R7 has been able to play a lot of this, but this team has just not been consistent really at all. When you look at the strengths and the weaknesses for them domestically, a lot of them have just turned into weaknesses internationally. A lot of the things that we thought they would be good at, or that we thought at least they would have an advantage over like minor region teams with, they just don't have. I've always been a little bit lower on the top side of this map. Sniper, I think that's a pretty general take. I think he wasn't very good in playoffs, and he's actually been okay at this tournament. He's really not been the problem for 100 Thieves at all, but River, I just seem to have a little bit of a different opinion on. I think he has actually been pretty good at this tournament, and we'll get into where I think the problems are for 100 Thieves in a second, but River has the same kinds of problems that he had domestically, where sometimes he can just be a bit wrong place, wrong time in the early game. He doesn't really seem to have a great sense of being able to track enemy junglers. That's always been a bit of a weakness for him, even going back to when he was playing on PSG Talon many years ago. He has always struggled to understand where exactly he should be in the early game. Now, the moment that clock ticks over to 12, 13, 14 minutes, the guy figures everything out. He becomes one of the stronger junglers in the play-in series, and I think the stats end up reflecting that. This guy can take over team fights, and his mid games have been excellent, but you hear a lot of talk on, I guess just the general broadcast by a lot of commentators, including North American ones that have watched every single game of his over the course of this year, about how he is the heart and soul of this team, about how they would be nowhere without him, and I just don't agree with that analysis. I think if you're looking for the heart and soul of the team, it is clearly Quid. Now, obviously, off the Rift, it's probably River in terms of being able to motivate these players, but in terms of on the Rift, Quid is the difference between winning a game and losing a game for 100 Thieves. As simple as it gets. When Quid wins in the mid lane, when he can go into the mid to late game with gold, they win. They win almost every single one of those games. They win almost every single one of those setups, and if he goes into the late game and he's losing and he doesn't have a lot of gold and he doesn't have a lot of tempo, almost always they are going to lose that game. It always comes down to whether or not Quid is in a good enough position to be able to carry team fights, because the rest of this team just isn't carryable. Like, I'm not saying that they can't carry, like, player-wise. I think River can carry games. He's definitely good enough. Sniper and Tomo have been able to carry games, at least domestically, in the past, but this team doesn't know how to play around a River carry. This team doesn't know how to play around a Sniper or a Tomo carry. They only really know how to play around a Quid carry, and that very limited playstyle has held them back a ton, because it means that if Quid isn't good enough to be able to gap his opposition on the other side, then they just can't win games, and that is going to be a problem here against PSG, because PSG have Maple in the mid lane, and not only is Maple a very good player, he's kind of known for being hyper stable. When you think of Maple and his playstyle for the last decade in LoL esports, you think of a guy who might not be the best laner of all time, who might not have the best early games, but he almost never goes down in CS by a ridiculous amount, except against Faker in that infamous matchup, but outside of that, he almost never loses super hard in lane, and he's phenomenal macro-wise. He is a great roamer, and he's awesome in team fights. That's what you think of when you think of Maple, and so if Maple can neutralize this mid lane matchup, basically just go even, he's going to be better than Quid in the back half of these games. And then you're looking at players like Aji, who have been really good at this tournament, Betty and Woody, who I had a lot of expectation for coming into this. I said in my power rankings that Woody was like the player that stood out to me as like the biggest shock star. Like, I thought he was like a true top-end major region level support when I was watching the playoffs. He was the best player on PSG domestically, and it wasn't close. We haven't seen that at this tournament. If he can get that out against 100 Thieves, that's huge. And then there's Junjia, who is kind of the big name, I guess, on this team now because of his time in the LPL. He's a former world champion. He won it with EDG back in 2021 as a substitute, but this guy is really good, and he's just not been good at this tournament. In fact, he's been inting quite a lot at this tournament. So a lot for these teams to build off of. If Quid can win in the mid lane, I think it's quite simple. It's as simple as Quid winning and 100 Thieves wins, right? If Quid loses, if Maple's able to get the better of him, especially if players like Junjia and Aji and Woody and Betty are playing like even okay or winning a little bit, then I think PSG is going to be favored, which is why yesterday in the video I took PSG as my pick in this series. I just think they have a little bit more of a dynamic play style, and I don't have faith in 100 Thieves. I don't think their macro is very good, and honestly, I think that their individual mechanics are not good enough to carry them across that finish line. So we'll see if that ends up being the case. Of course, the only way to know is to go game by game, and that means starting with game number 1. So let's get into it. The winner of game number 1 was PSG Talon. They are going to take game number 1. They're going to go up 1-0 in this series, and I'd love to sit here and tell you how close and fun and back and forth this game was. I'm sorry, this was a 26-minute massacre from PSG Talon. This is, without a doubt, the most dominant game of the tournament up until this point. You can see that in literally every statistic, and the shocking part, you see all these stats. Somehow, some way, it was even less close than any of the stats on screen would indicate. This was a game that was 20-1 in terms of kills. 100 Thieves had negative pressure anywhere on the map in this game. There was nothing they could get done. They lost early on an early game comp. You have a scaling comp for PSG with Skarner and Gnar and Orianna and even a Jhin, where it's like, okay, well, if they go late, the later we go in this game, the worse it gets for 100 Thieves, and 100 Thieves got obliterated early. So you knew this was going to be a disaster basically from minute 8 onwards. I think that they were down like 3k gold 8 minutes in. It's just absurd. And credit to PSG. They were unbelievable in this game. And player of the game for me is going to go to Woody in the support position. I was talking in the preview here about how good Woody was domestically, and, I talked a lot about that in my pre-tournament power rankings about just how ridiculous he was. It was the best he's ever looked individually as a player. Typically, when you speak of PSG Talon, you speak of the middle of the map. You speak of Junjie, you think of Maple, right? Those are the players that you speak of in terms of taking over these games. They've been the star for PSG Talon over the course of the past couple of years. The reason that this team has been so dominant domestically and has been able to make an impact internationally. But Betty and Woody, I think, are the best they have ever been as a duo. Woody in particular has really stepped up, and Aja has been excellent at this tournament. Obviously, the guy had ridiculous 1v1 like solo kill stats domestically, first blood stats domestically. It was genuinely insane, but all of them won here, and Woody was the one who stood out the most. Alistair creating a lot of the situations for the rest of the team to follow up. I'd love to sit here and say that it was just Woody, but I mean, come on. In a game where you're winning 20-1, it's everyone. Like, there is no one singular lane that is dominating more than the others. I just think Woody was definitely the most noticeable in terms of kind of the creation plays here on the Alistair. He was awesome, just completely denying basically anything that 100 Thieves wanted to do while also making their lives a living hell in terms of engages. And then it's not like the rest of the map was bad. Maple was excellent. We talked about it. If Quid loses, if Maple is the better mid laner in this series, 100 Thieves have zero chance. Like, it is a 0% chance they can win this series without Quid being able to beat Maple. And if Maple's going to come out, play Orianna into Hui, and just win, like straight up win, it's over. Like, there is no way for 100 Thieves to be able to recover from something like that. And Maple had an excellent game here in game number 1. Betty goes deathless, 7-0-8 on Jhin. I mean, a great game from him. Junjia on Skarner, a pick that he has quite frankly inted on over the course of this tournament, has easily his best Skarner game that I think I've seen him have. This is still a champion with a ton of priority. I expect that to continue at this tournament, but I mean, Junjie looked amazing. He clearly has a bit of an affinity for this champion and the creation power of it, even if it hasn't worked so far at this tournament, and Aja has gapped everyone that he has gone into. So credit to PSG Talon. This team looked awesome. I mean, this was dominant. This is the PSG we thought we were getting going into this tournament, but for 100 Thieves, what the hell, man? Like, what are you even supposed to build off of here? This is literally just a GG go next. Like, how do you even, like, what are you supposed to do after like 5 minutes into this game? It's already completely over for you. You even took it a little bit slow. It's not like this game was entirely out of reach like at the start. It's not like you lost level 1 or level 2. Like, you just got obliterated from level 5 onwards. There was no recovering the position that you put yourself in, which is just a disaster. Dud of the game could go to everyone. This is a team-wide dud of the game. Really, the only player that doesn't deserve it is Sniper in the top lane, who was generally fine on the Renekton. He wasn't great, but he also didn't lose nearly as hard as everybody else. He's actually been pretty good at Worlds. Funny, because I think he was a gigantic disaster for them domestically in the playoffs, but Tomo's gonna get dud of the game for me. How do you position like this on Varus? Like, how do you... Tomo's a good player. Like, he's not an elite player. He's not a star or anything, but he is, like, good enough. Like, he's a big reason why this team's at Worlds. They upgraded a lot in the bot lane, bringing Tomo in, but this game looked like a Bronze 1 player playing it. Like, I don't understand. Like, you're playing Varus. You have long range. You have the ability to stay safe. Just, you have no mobility. Don't step up and randomly die for no reason. And yet he was constantly stepping up over and over again, putting himself in danger. Just an awful game from him. Ayla wasn't much better on the Renata, although I'm not sure what he's supposed to do this game when every single other player on his team is running it down all the time. Quid is involved in nothing. River was horrible in the early game. Like, again, I understand why the broadcasts and the commentators, glaze him so much. He's the most glazed player in the world, at least in terms of how the commentators talk about him, but this is not all that out of the ordinary in terms of a River game. He had quite a few of these over the course of this year. It's just not good for 100 Thieves. They have such a simple game plan, and if they can't execute it, it's over. It's doomed. And now they're going into game 2 with no momentum, no morale, and they need to win. If they lose, they are eliminated. They become the first ever North American team to lose in the play-in stage. But for PSG, they want to get through. They want to be a team that makes the main stage. That was the expectation. It wasn't just to make the main stage. It was to be the best team in play-ins. That is not accomplishable for them in terms of their results, but they can accomplish the second best thing by winning game number 2 here and closing out this series. So, are they going to be able to close it out, or is 100 Thieves going to be able to bounce back from this miraculously awful game in game number 1 and be able to tie things up? Well, the winner of game number 2 was PSG. They are going to take game number 2. They're going to take this series 2-0, and they will officially qualify for the Swiss stage at the World Championships. That means that is the end of the line for 100 Thieves, and I can't say they went out with a bang. They went out with a whimper. 2 back-to-back stomps coming in from PSG. The series was not close, especially coming off of that previous series with Rainbow 7 and Pain Gaming, where it was just so back and forth. It was so close in game number 3. For this to be such a blowout, out to be so anticlimactic, quite frankly. It's just kind of embarrassing for 100 Thieves overall, and quite frankly, this entire tournament run has been embarrassing for 100 Thieves, but I want to make where I stand on this kind of clear. Like, yeah, this is decently embarrassing for NA, because I think the depth of that region got so much worse this year. I think 100 Thieves is, in my opinion, pretty unequivocally the worst Western team to ever go to Worlds. I don't even think I really have to explain that, not even just in terms of results, but I think I could have probably told you that before the tournament started. Typically speaking, you go 3 deep in North America and in Europe and a lot of these regions. It's just not there right now. Like, we don't have enough good teams in North America or in Europe, quite frankly. Like, Mad Lions is, surprisingly good for what they are, but people would have told you going into this tournament they were around 100 Thieves in terms of skill level. But, like, the clear truth of it is 100 Thieves is the worst Western team that we have ever sent to the World Championships. They probably shouldn't have been here in the first place if Cloud9 hadn't completely shit the bed, but this isn't about Cloud9. And honestly, quite frankly, I don't think this is about NA. I think this is just 100 Thieves, right? We're trying to say that NA as a region is encapsulated by a team that really wasn't ever expected to be this good, was projected bottom 3-ish all year long until they actually just overperformed it, ended up getting to the World Championships, and then kind of played up to their roster's talent. Are we really sitting here and saying that, oh, like, that's representative of Team Liquid, that's representative of FlyQuest? I just don't believe that. I think obviously if they go out and bomb the Swiss stage, that's an entirely different conversation, but the hype we had surrounding North America because Team Liquid was doing so well internationally for most of this year, it shouldn't just go away because 100 Thieves, a team that is nowhere near as good as Team Liquid or FlyQuest, wasn't able to do anything in the play-in stage. Like, I guess that's just kind of my argument on that, but getting to the actual winners, PSG looked amazing in this series. If you wanted a capstone to close out the play-in stage to show that a lot of the weird missteps that you made at the beginning of this tournament against Pain, against Mad Lions, that they're not as dangerous as maybe you would have thought, this is definitely it. Player of the game and player of the series is an absolute no-brainer. It's got to go to Woody. These are some of the most impressive Alistair games that I have seen in quite a long time. This is the MVP caliber Woody that I was hyping up before this tournament started, that I was seeing domestically, the form that he was crushing in the PCS when he was playing on 14-16. This is the version of him that I was really hoping we were going to see. Again, Woody's kind of just been a good support over the course of his career. Nothing that's been ridiculously extraordinary, but also nothing that's been bad. Like, he has definitely been good enough to be, like, clearly a multiple-time champion in the PCS. However, this is the best he has ever been. Like, he has completely been unlocked on 16, 14, 15, and clearly just in Season 14. Like, with the way that the support meta has moved out and how being a jack of all trades, being good at multiple sections of the game really increases your floor as a support right now. I think Woody being such a good all-arounder and being so good on engaged supports really opens up his lane to be a primary facilitator and, quite frankly, a bit of a playmaking star for this PSG team. It reminds me a lot of someone like Lebrav or even someone over like Moham over on DK, like at this tournament. So I think Woody's kind of in that same conversation in terms of players at that skill level. He truly has been exceptional, and I'm not sure you're going to find some better Alistair games than what you saw on tape in this one. He obliterated 100 Thieves basically by himself. Junji turned this entire tournament narrative around. He was being talked about like he was completely underperforming throughout the entire start of this tournament. He had a bad series against Pain where he threw away their one loss, and he was pretty awful against Mad Lions, getting completely out-jungled by Elyoya even when he didn't have items, which is never ideal. But Junjia ends up bouncing back, goes, I think, deathless across both of these games, which is very, very strong. You needed a performance like this. He's got to step up. He's got to be a primary leader, a primary carry for this team if they're going to want to do anything in the actual Swiss stage. You have someone like Aja, who was really good in this game on the Rumble. We're continuing to see Rumble priority. Again, not a surprise to me, but I'm sure a surprise to a lot of other people. Betty looked excellent on Ezreal. He's played this champion a million times over the course of his career, so it's nice to see that continued to look good. And Maple was very good in the mid lane as well. Maybe not quite the carry that you would typically see out of the Yone, a champion that I think is very broken on this patch, but Maple was still very strong. Overall, PSG just won across the board, but man, I hope Woody can keep this form up. We'll talk about the draw. It's not a good one for PSG going into the Swiss stage, but if they can, face some teams in the lower part of like the 0-1 or the 0-2 stage of the Swiss, like that could be very dangerous. Woody's the kind of player that can take over some of these lower rated teams that have just auto-qualified into the main stage. So I'm excited to see that, but for 100 Thieves, like, what is there even to say? Sniper looked really good at this tournament. I think that there were a lot of positives to take away from Sniper's gameplay. He was awesome in this game on the Aatrox. He was actually up in gold over Aja for a majority of this game on the Aatrox. He just had absolutely no teammates, and it's good to see that Sniper actually did play well. here. I think he was the best player for 100 Thieves at the tournament as a whole. People are going to point out River, but River lost almost every single game that they lost in this entire tournament, obviously with the exception of the one game on the Viego that he team fought on really well, but people are going to cling on to that one and not look at the 3 or 4 other games where he was just truly horrendous throughout this tournament. And then Quid, I think he was better than his scoreline would indicate, but still not good. Ayla was miserable. Ayla's going to get dud of the game. I'm a big Ayla defender. I think oftentimes a lot of the macro problems that 100 Thieves have is just like thrown onto Ayla, like, oh, this is an Ayla problem. And in reality, it's just kind of a team communication problem. I've expressed that in the past. I think this guy has been really good against lower level competition. He's been very good domestically, but he was exposed at Worlds. Like, he's just not good enough to be able to play at this level right now. Maybe he won't get there ever, but he's certainly not good enough at the moment. Again, like, there's just not a lot to talk about when it comes to 100 Thieves. Their year is over. They're going to be happy that they made the tournament, getting this kind of experience, this international experience on these young players like Sniper and Quid and Tomo and Ayla that hopefully will be back here some other time. Like, that's really good for them, but they were never expected to be like dominant forces. Even still, this is crazy underwhelming. Them not getting out of Swiss stage is an absolute disaster. Them being the first ever North American team to not qualify out of the play-in stage is just as bad as it gets. Like, there's just no other way to say it. This is a massive disappointment for 100 Thieves, but congratulations to PSG Talon. Excited to see them in the main stage. Hopefully this is a sign of good things to come from them, that they started playing better in this series, but who knows? 100 Thieves form looks horrendous right now, so we'll see what ends up coming of PSG Talon, but I'm just happy that they made it through. All right, but that is going to do it for my Worlds 2024 play-ins, day number 5, the final day overview and analysis video up on the screen. The Swiss stage for day number 1. We got our draw, we have our matchups, and I'm excited to go over them. Obviously, the way that this was seeded is there were 4 pools, pool 1, 2, 3, and 4. They were slotted in, teams were slotted into those pools based on, where they got to the tournament from. The number 1 seeds from all 4 of the major regions were pool 1. The number 2 seeds from all 4 of the major regions were pool 2, and then the 3 and 4 seeds from the LCK and the LPL were pool 3, and then the play-in teams were pool 4. So pool 1 teams are always going to get drawn against pool 4, pool 2 teams were always getting drawn against pool 3 teams. That makes sense. I'm sure you guys watched the draw. You probably know the format, but if you didn't, there is the explanation. We'll quickly go over the preview for these games, but again, we're going to be going over all of these in the videos that come out later on this week once the games happen. But quickly to talk about it, we've got Billy Gaming taking on Mad Lions Koi. This should be a very easy win for BLG. This is a horrible draw for Mad, the team that probably looked the best coming out of the play-in stage, now has to play one of the best teams in the world. Kind of brutal, but it is the way that pool 4 goes. You're not really going to get a good matchup unless you get lucky and draw FlyQuest, and so it is what it is. But then you've got probably the matchup of the day, in my opinion, Top Esports taking on T1. The fact that we're getting this in round 1, this is a rematch of the Esports World Cup final. This is awesome. I'm really glad that we're getting this. I don't know who's going to be able to take it because, T1 always steps up at Worlds, but Top Esports has just been better throughout this year. I'm going to stick to my guns right now and say that TES is going to be better, but if T1 wins, I'm certainly not going to be surprised. Like, it would make the most sense. Top Esports and Org known for underperforming at Worlds, T1 and Org known for overperforming at Worlds. Like, it would make all of the sense in the world for it to go that way. So that's definitely the matchup of the day, the closest one to talk about. Gen G taking on Weibo Gaming. Probably the best team in the world in Gen G. It's a really bad draw for Weibo, but you kind of have to just live with it. You're probably starting this tournament 0-1. It would be a big upset if Tarzan was able to pull off the miracle, but I think Canyon is probably just going to be better, and obviously Chovy is probably just going to destroy Xiaohu. I think that that's a pretty miserable matchup in the mid lane for Weibo Gaming. So Gen G is my pick there. You've got a great matchup here for Fnatic. It's Fnatic taking on D plus Kia. This is dream scenario for Fnatic in terms of what they could have drawn here. There's really no good outcome being a pool 2 team. Having to pull one of the 3 or 4 seeds from the LCK or the LPL is not good, but if you had to get one of them, D plus Kia is definitely the one that you would have wanted to get. They're by far the weakest of the Eastern teams at this tournament, in my opinion, and I think Fnatic has a chance to win this. That being said, I think DK is better, and I would expect them to be able to pick up the win, but if Fnatic was ever going to go 1-0 to start off the Swiss stage, this was the game to do it. You have Team Liquid taking on LNG Esports. Again, another pretty good draw for Team Liquid. If they ended up drawing, I don't know, Weibo Gaming or especially a team like T1, I think things would have been a lot worse for them. But again, one of the easier teams that they could have gotten in LNG Esports. It seems like Scout is going to be there at the tournament that was announced today, so I'm excited to see, Scout back. It definitely changes the outlook of this team. They are a lot better than maybe I was talking about them in my power rankings. They're probably a lot closer to being number 6 in terms of the teams at this tournament, which should make them pretty big favorites in this matchup, and I certainly wouldn't expect Team Liquid to come out and win this, but I do think TL has the best chance of doing well at this tournament as a North American team. You have Hanwha Life Esports taking on PSG. I love PSG. They looked very good against 100 Thieves, but HLE is going to obliterate them. This series should not even be, or this game, I should say, should not even be remotely close. I imagine that HLE will dominate. The only thing that PSG has to hang on their hats is that they are kind of the second generation Korean killers. So we'll see how that ends up going for them. But you've got FlyQuest taking on GAM. Again, another dream draw for North America here, getting GAM in round 1 for Fly. Pain Gaming would have been great as well, but GAM is certainly a beatable team for FlyQuest, and I imagine they will come out and beat them. I'm not the biggest fan of FlyQuest. I don't think they're going to do particularly well at this tournament, but GAM should be a team that they end up taking down unless GAM is somehow way better than I was anticipating. That bottom side of the map should be an absolute disaster for GAM against Fly. And then for G2, they draw Pain. A good matchup here. Really excited to see another potential Brazil upsetting Europe experience. That would always be fun to live on in the memory of Kaboom. But yeah, G2's better than Pain, and they should be able to win this. If they don't, that is a disaster. That is like tournament over kind of disaster. Like G2 would have to really climb up the mountain to try to get back after a loss like that. So, you know, my picks, I guess, for day one: Billy Gaming, Top Esports, Gen G, D+ Kia, LNG Esports, Hanwha Life Esports, FlyQuest, and G2. Let me know if you agree or disagree with those takes down in the comment section below, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We're, of course, going to be covering every single day of the World Championships, every single day of Swiss, quarterfinals, semifinals, finals, all of that stuff, and then, of course, off-season coverage right around the corner after the tournament ends. If you're interested in that stuff, hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But, of course, with all that being said, I hope you are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all